You ever notice how the strongest people never fall apart in front of a crowd, only after everyone leaves? The last elevator chimed somewhere behind her, soft and distant, like the building itself was exhaling after a long performance, and for the first time all night, Victoria Langford stood alone without an audience, her heels resting still against polished concrete, one hand lightly braced against a cold pillar as the silence crept in, slow and unfamiliar, the kind of silence money couldn't soften and success couldn't fill. And she didn't move, not right away, because movement meant control, and control was the one thing slipping quietly through her fingers. The echoes of laughter from the gala upstairs had already faded, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of gasoline and rain drifting in from the open ramp. Her phone buzzed once in her hand, then stopped, and she didn't check it, not this time, because every message waiting for her was a demand, a deal. A reminder of who she had to be again in the morning, and right now, she didn't want to be anyone at all. Across the dim edge of the garage, a man stood near a maintenance cart, still as if he had always been part of the space, his jacket worn at the sleeves, his posture easy but attentive. Marcus Hale didn't step forward, didn't call out, he just watched the way she shifted her weight slightly too late to keep her balance, the way her shoulders tightened like she was holding something in instead of letting it fall, and he recognized it. Not the designer dress, not the title attached to her name, but the quiet moment before someone breaks, the kind that doesn't make noise. She took a step, then another, slower this time, and the ground didn't quite meet her the way it should, her breath catching just enough to betray her, and that's when he moved, not fast, not dramatic, just enough to close the distance between them before gravity finished what it had started, his hand hovering first, giving her the space to refuse, to pull away, to remain who she was supposed to be, but she didn't. And when she leaned, even slightly, he steadied her without holding on longer than necessary. "Ma'am, you okay?" His voice was low, careful, like he was speaking into something fragile rather than someone powerful, and she let out a small breath that didn't quite become a laugh, didn't quite become anything at all. "I'm fine," she said, but the words didn't land, not even to her own ears, and for a second she closed her eyes like she was trying to find the version of herself that never needed help, but it didn't come back. Marcus didn't argue, didn't correct her, he just nodded once, subtle, respectful. Then shifted his stance so she could stand without feeling held. "I'll walk you out," he added, simple, like it wasn't an offer, wasn't a favor, just something that made sense in the moment, and she hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, but because she wasn't used to being seen like this, without the armor, without the distance, without the constant negotiation of power. But the quiet in his voice didn't ask for anything, didn't expect anything, and that made it harder to refuse than any pressure ever could. Somewhere above them, a car door slammed, distant, irrelevant, the world continuing without noticing the shift happening in the space between them, and for the first time that night, Victoria didn't reach for her phone, didn't straighten her posture, didn't remind him who she was, she just nodded once, small, almost invisible, and let him walk beside her. Not in front, not behind, just there, steady. As if that was all he had ever intended to be. The air outside felt different, cooler, sharper, like the night had peeled something away from her and left her standing without it, and Victoria did not rush, did not reach for the usual rhythm of fast steps and faster decisions. She walked carefully, each step measured as if the ground itself required permission now, and Marcus stayed beside her without crowding the space, his hands relaxed at his sides. His eyes not on her face but on the path ahead, watching for the small missteps she did not want him to notice, the kind that said more than any confession could. The parking level opened wider as they moved, rows of cars sitting silent under pale lights, reflections stretching long across polished concrete, and somewhere in that quiet, her breathing began to slow, not steady, but less fragile, less like it might break at any second. She glanced at him once, brief, almost accidental, and he did not turn to meet it, did not take that moment as an invitation. He simply adjusted his pace to match hers, nothing more, nothing less. "Which way?" he asked, not assuming, not leading, and she lifted her hand just slightly, pointing toward a black sedan parked near the far corner, the kind of car that usually announced her arrival before she even stepped out, but tonight it looked like any other machine, quiet, unimportant. When they reached it, she paused, her hand hovering near the door handle as if she had forgotten what came next, the sequence of simple actions that used to feel automatic, and Marcus noticed, not with surprise, but with recognition, the way someone notices a familiar silence. He reached into his jacket slowly, pulling out a clean cloth, folded, practical, and, without a word, he wiped the faint line of rain that had gathered along the top edge of the door, a small gesture, almost invisible, but precise, intentional, and she watched it like it meant more than it should have, like no one had done something so unnecessary for her in a very long time. "You do not have to drive," he said, still not looking directly at her, his tone even. "I can take you." And there was no urgency in it, no pressure, just an option placed gently in the space between them. And she exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the edge of the door before letting go. "I should not," she replied, but the words did not carry conviction, not tonight, and for a moment neither of them moved, the city humming somewhere far above them, distant, detached, like a life she had stepped out of without realizing it. Marcus gave a small nod, not agreement, not disagreement, just acknowledgement, and stepped back half a pace, giving her room to decide without watching her do it. And that was when something shifted, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet change in the way she stood, her shoulders lowering slightly, the tension in her posture easing as if she had been holding it for years. Without noticing, she turned the key in the door, then stopped, the sound of the lock clicking too final, too definitive, and instead of opening it, she let her hand fall to her side. "Just walk me a little further," she said, softer now, and it was not a request she would have made in any other moment, not to someone like him, not in a place like this, but the night had already taken enough from her to leave honesty in its place. Marcus did not react, did not question, he simply stepped forward again, aligning his pace with hers as they moved past the car, deeper into the open stretch of the garage where the lights grew dimmer and the silence thicker, and for the first time in a long time, Victoria did not feel like she was being followed by expectations or watched by invisible eyes. She felt accompanied, not by status, not by obligation, but by something steadier. Something that did not ask her to be anything other than what she was in that moment, and she did not realize it yet, but that was the first thing she would remember in the morning. They kept walking, past the rows of parked cars and the fading lines of painted numbers on the concrete floor, until the garage opened into a quieter side exit where the city air slipped in through a half-raised gate, carrying with it the distant sound of traffic and something softer beneath it, like the world continuing without urgency. And Victoria slowed again, not because she had to, but because she was not ready for the moment to end. Not ready to step back into the version of herself that always knew what to do next. Marcus noticed the shift, the way her steps became less about moving forward and more about staying present, and he adjusted without thinking, matching the rhythm, giving the silence room to breathe between them. "You do this often?" she asked after a while, her voice quieter now, stripped of the sharp edge it usually carried, and he glanced at her briefly, not long enough to study, just enough to answer honestly. "No, ma'am," he said, then after a beat, "just when it feels like someone needs not to be alone." And the words settled between them, simple, unpolished, but steady in a way she was not used to hearing. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh but softer. "You do not even know me," she said, and he nodded once, looking ahead again. "I do not need to." And there was no weight in it, no hidden meaning, just a statement that did not try to define her or reduce her to what she represented. They reached the edge of the building where the sidewalk stretched out under dim streetlights, the city glowing in the distance like something separate, and for a moment she stopped completely, her hand brushing lightly against the cold metal railing as if grounding herself in something real, something that did not shift depending on who was watching. "Most people," she began, then paused, her voice catching not from weakness but from unfamiliar honesty. "Most people would have taken advantage of this." And she did not specify what this was, did not need to, and Marcus did not rush to respond, did not correct her or reassure her in the way others might have. He simply waited, letting the sentence exist without trying to fix it. After a second, he spoke, low and even. "Most people are trying to get something." And he shifted his weight slightly, hands still relaxed at his sides. "I already have what I need." And she turned to look at him fully this time, searching his face for something she could categorize, something she could measure or understand within the framework she trusted. But there was nothing there asking to be recognized, nothing trying to prove itself, just a calm certainty that did not depend on her seeing it. The street light above them flickered once, briefly, casting a softer glow across the space, and she noticed the small details she would have missed any other night, the worn edge of his jacket, the quiet steadiness in his posture, the absence of urgency in everything he did, and something inside her shifted again, not breaking, not collapsing, just loosening. Like a door she had forgotten was locked had finally been opened without force. She looked down at her hands, still, empty, not holding a phone, not holding control, and for a moment she did not reach for either. "I do not want to go home," she said finally, not dramatic, not desperate. Just true, and the words hung there, unprotected, and Marcus did not react with surprise, did not question why. He simply nodded once, as if she had said something completely reasonable, and glanced toward the quiet street stretching ahead. "Then we do not have to rush getting there," he replied, and he did not offer a solution, did not suggest a plan. He just stood there, present, steady, leaving the next step open, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria did not feel like she was falling behind or racing ahead. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, even if she did not understand why yet. Marcus did not move right away, not toward the street, not toward her car. He simply let the moment settle the way it needed to, like he understood that rushing it would break something neither of them could see yet, and Victoria stayed where she was, her hand still lightly resting against the railing, the cool metal grounding her in a way nothing else had that night, the city lights stretching out in front of her but feeling farther than ever. Like a place she could return to later but not right now. A car passed at the end of the block, headlights sweeping briefly across them before disappearing, and in that short flash of light she saw herself reflected faintly in the glass door beside them, not the version the world knew, not the one framed in magazine covers and boardrooms, just a woman standing still, shoulders lowered, eyes tired in a way sleep would not fix, and she looked away quickly. Not out of shame but out of unfamiliarity. "There is a diner 2 blocks down," Marcus said after a moment, his voice steady, offering direction without pressure. "It stays open late." And he did not look at her when he said it, did not wait for approval, he just placed the option there like something simple, something that did not carry expectation, and she considered it, not the place itself but what it represented, a space where she would not be known, where no one would be watching, where nothing would be required of her except to sit and exist, and for a second she almost said no out of habit, out of the reflex that told her she did not belong in places like that, but the thought faded before it fully formed. She nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, and stepped away from the railing, falling into step beside him again as they began walking down the quiet sidewalk, their pace unhurried, their footsteps soft against the concrete. The air smelled faintly of rain and asphalt, and somewhere nearby a neon sign buzzed softly, casting a muted glow onto the empty street. And Victoria noticed details she would have ignored before, the uneven cracks in the pavement, the distant hum of a vending machine, the way the night held its own rhythm separate from the world she controlled during the day. Marcus walked with the same steady presence he had carried all along, not filling the silence with unnecessary words, not asking questions that would pull her back into explanations. He just remained there, consistent. Like a fixed point she did not have to navigate around. When they reached the diner, its windows glowing warm against the darkness, she paused again just outside the door, her reflection catching in the glass for a second time. But this time she did not turn away immediately. She studied it, the loosened posture, the absence of urgency, the quiet space around her that no longer felt like something to escape, and Marcus opened the door without announcing it, stepping back slightly to let her enter first. Not as a gesture of formality, but as a simple act of consideration, and she stepped inside, the soft chime of the door marking the transition, the scent of coffee and something warm wrapping around her in a way that felt unexpectedly familiar. Inside, The diner was nearly empty, a single waitress wiping down the counter, a couple sitting in the far booth speaking in low voices, nothing that required attention, nothing that demanded she perform, and she exhaled slowly as she moved toward a booth by the window, sliding into the seat with a quiet ease that surprised even her, and Marcus sat across from her without hesitation, not stiff, not overly cautious, just present. A menu rested between them, simple, worn at the edges, and she did not reach for it right away. Instead, she let her hands rest flat against the table, feeling the solid surface beneath her, something steady, something real, and for the first time that night, she did not feel like she needed to leave. The waitress approached with a quiet kind of familiarity, the kind that came from years of seeing people at their most unguarded, and she placed 2 glasses of water on the table without asking, her eyes flicking between them briefly before offering a small nod that did not intrude on the silence they had built, and Marcus thanked her softly while Victoria simply watched, noticing how natural it felt. How nothing in that exchange required explanation or performance. The menu remained untouched between them, its laminated surface catching the overhead light, but neither of them reached for it right away, as if choosing what to eat was less important than staying in the moment they had stepped into. Victoria rested her hands around the glass of water, the cool condensation pressing lightly against her palms, grounding, real, and she stared at it for a second longer than necessary before speaking. "Do you always sit this quietly?" Her voice low, not accusatory, just curious in a way she had not allowed herself to be in years, and Marcus gave a slight shrug, leaning back just enough to be comfortable but not distant. "Only when it feels right," he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no attempt to fill the space with something more impressive, just the truth as he saw it. She nodded slowly, absorbing that, the idea that silence could be chosen, not forced, that it could exist without tension, and she realized then how rarely she had experienced that, how most of her conversations were transactions, measured, strategic, always leading somewhere. The waitress returned briefly, asking if they were ready, and Marcus glanced at Victoria first, giving her the space to decide, and she hesitated, not because she did not know what she wanted, but because she was not used to being asked without expectation. "Coffee," she said finally, simple, and the word felt different leaving her mouth, stripped of preference, stripped of control, just a choice, and Marcus nodded. "Same." And the waitress left. Again, the soft sound of her footsteps fading into the background. Victoria leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting to the window beside their booth, watching the faint movement of headlights passing by, each car a small reminder of a world still in motion, still demanding, but it felt distant now, like something she could observe without being pulled into it. "I do not remember the last time I sat somewhere without needing to be somewhere else," she said after a while, almost to herself, and Marcus followed her gaze briefly before returning his attention to the table. "That is because most places you go are trying to take something from you," he replied, his tone even, not critical, just observant, and she let out a small breath, a quiet acknowledgement of something she had never put into words. The coffee arrived, steaming lightly in front of them, and she wrapped her hands around the mug, the warmth seeping into her fingers, steady, uncomplicated, and she took a sip, not out of habit, but out of presence, tasting it fully for the first time in longer than she could remember, and it was not perfect, not curated, but it was honest. She set the mug down carefully, her eyes lifting to meet his for a brief moment, and there was something different there now, not vulnerability exactly, but the absence of resistance. "You said you already have what you need," she said, her voice softer, more direct this time. "What does that look like?" And Marcus did not answer immediately. Not because he did not know, but because he chose his words with the same care he moved through everything else, and when he spoke, it was simple, almost quiet enough to miss. "Peace when I go home," he said, and nothing about it sounded like a performance, nothing about it asked for validation, it was just a statement of fact, and Victoria held on to that for a second longer than she expected, the word peace settling somewhere unfamiliar inside her, not as something she recognized, but as something she suddenly realized she had been missing. Victoria did not respond right away, the word peace lingering in her mind longer than she expected, not because she disagreed with it, but because she did not know where it fit in her world, a world built on constant motion, constant negotiation, where silence often meant something had gone wrong. She looked down at her coffee again, watching the faint ripple settle on the surface, and for a moment she let herself sit with it, not analyzing, not measuring, just feeling the quiet weight of something she could not control, and strangely, it did not feel threatening. "I do not think I would recognize that if I had it," she said after a while, her voice steady but softer than before, as if admitting something she had never needed to say out loud, and Marcus did not interrupt, did not rush to reassure her or redefine the word for her. He simply listened, his posture unchanged, his presence consistent in a way that did not demand attention but held it anyway. "Most people do not," he replied eventually, his tone calm, almost reflective. "They get used to noise, so when it is quiet, it feels wrong." And she let out a faint breath through her nose, a small reaction that carried more agreement than she intended to show. Outside the window, another car passed, its headlights stretching briefly across the glass before fading into the distance, and she followed it with her eyes until it disappeared, the motion simple, uninterrupted, and she realized she had not checked her phone once since sitting down, not even out of habit, and that absence felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. She turned the glass slightly with her fingertips, tracing the edge absent-mindedly, and then looked up at him again, more directly this time. "And you just have it?" she asked, not challenging, but genuinely trying to understand, and Marcus considered the question for a second, not because he needed to think of an answer, but because he chose to answer carefully. "Some days more than others," he said, "but it is there." And he paused briefly, his gaze steady but not intense. "It is not something I have to chase." And she nodded slowly, absorbing that, the idea that something valuable could exist without pursuit, without constant effort, felt almost foreign to her. The waitress passed by again, refilling their coffee without interrupting, and Victoria noticed the quiet rhythm of the place, the way things happened without announcement, without urgency, and it contrasted sharply with the environments she was used to, where every movement carried weight, every decision required attention. She wrapped her hands around the mug again, this time not just to feel the warmth, but to hold on to the moment a little longer. To stay where she was without thinking about where she needed to be next. "I have spent years building something," she said, quietly, her eyes lowering slightly as she spoke. "And I am not sure I know how to sit in it." And the admission hung there, simple but heavy, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just true in a way that did not need embellishment, and Marcus nodded once, not as approval, but as recognition. "That happens," he said, his voice even, "when what you build becomes louder than why you built it." And she looked at him again, that sentence landing deeper than she expected, not because it was complex, but because it felt precise, like it had been placed exactly where it needed to be. She did not respond immediately, instead she leaned back slightly in her seat, her shoulders resting against the booth, her posture more relaxed than it had been all night, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence returning, but this time it did not feel uncertain, it felt settled, like something that did not need to be filled. And in that quiet space, with the low hum of the diner around them and the city continuing somewhere beyond the glass, Victoria realized that she was not thinking about tomorrow, not thinking about expectations or obligations or the version of herself she would have to step back into. She was just there, in that booth, with a man who asked for nothing, and for reasons she could not yet explain, that felt like the first honest moment she had had in a very long time. The clock above the counter ticked quietly, its steady rhythm almost blending into the low hum of the diner, and Victoria found herself watching it for a moment. Not because she was tracking time, but because it felt different now, slower, less demanding, like it was no longer something chasing her. She shifted slightly in her seat, her fingers still wrapped around the warm ceramic of her cup, and then she looked up again, her gaze more certain this time, less guarded. "Why did you stay?" she asked, the question simple but carrying a weight she did not fully explain, and Marcus did not look surprised by it. As if he had been expecting it in some quiet way, he leaned forward just a little, resting his forearms lightly on the table, his voice even. "Because you did not need someone to leave," he said. And there was no hesitation in his answer, no attempt to soften it or make it sound more significant than it was, just the truth placed plainly between them. She held his gaze for a second longer than before, searching again, not for inconsistency, but for intention, for some hidden reason behind his calm, but there was none she could find, and that absence unsettled her in a way she could not immediately name. "Everyone leaves when it gets inconvenient," she said quietly, almost as if she was stating a fact she had tested too many times, and Marcus gave a slight nod, acknowledging the truth in her words without agreeing to its permanence. "Some do," he replied. "Some just do not announce when they stay." And she looked down again at that, the sentence settling somewhere deeper this time, not challenging her belief, but gently shifting it. The waitress passed by once more, placing a small plate with toast between them, not ordered, just offered, and Marcus gave a small nod of thanks, sliding it slightly toward Victoria without comment, and she hesitated before taking a piece, not out of reluctance, but because the gesture felt unfamiliar, something given without expectation, and she took a small bite, almost absent-mindedly, the simple act grounding her further into the moment. Outside, the night had begun to thin, the dark sky softening just slightly at the edges, hinting at the early signs of morning. And Victoria noticed it without urgency, without the usual calculation of what the next day would demand from her. "Do you ever think about leaving it all?" she asked after a while, her voice quieter again, less defined, as if the question was not fully formed even in her own mind, and Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering not just the question, but the way she asked it. "Leaving what?" he said, not dismissing, but clarifying, and she let out a faint breath, her eyes drifting toward the window again. "The noise, the expectations, the constant need to be something," she replied, and there was no frustration in her tone, just a tired honesty that had been waiting for space to exist. Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze steady but gentle. "I used to," he said. "But then I realized I did not have to leave everything." He paused briefly, his words measured. "Just the parts that were not mine to carry." And she turned back to him, that line landing in a place she had not considered before, not as a solution, but as a possibility, something that did not require destruction, just discernment. She sat with that quietly, her posture more relaxed now, her shoulders no longer holding the same tension, and for a moment neither of them spoke again, the silence returning in a way that felt complete rather than empty. The first hint of dawn touched the glass beside them, soft, almost unnoticeable, and Victoria realized that the night had passed without her realizing it, without the usual sense of urgency or loss of time, and instead of feeling behind, she felt still, and in that stillness, something unfamiliar settled in her chest, not fully formed, not fully understood, but present, and she did not push it away. The light outside shifted almost imperceptibly, the dark blue of night thinning into a softer gray, and Victoria noticed it not as a signal to leave, but as something gentle, something unfolding without urgency, and for a moment she just watched it, her reflection in the glass now clearer, less shadowed, more defined, and she did not look away this time. Inside the diner, the quiet remained, the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant clink of dishes behind the counter, small sounds that did not compete for attention but simply existed, and Marcus sat across from her the same way he had all night, steady, unchanging, not checking the time, not shifting restlessly, as if being present was not something he had to try to do. Victoria let out a slow breath, her fingers loosening slightly around the cup, and then she did something she had not done once since sitting down. She reached for her phone, not quickly, not instinctively, but deliberately, and when she looked at the screen, the notifications were there, stacked, waiting, each one a reminder of the world she had stepped away from, meetings, messages, decisions, all pressing in silently. And for a second she just stared at them, not overwhelmed, not tempted, just aware. And then, just as slowly, she turned the screen off again and placed it face down on the table, not as an act of resistance, but as a quiet choice. Marcus noticed, not by watching her directly, but by the shift in the space between them, the subtle change that came when someone decided something without needing to announce it, and he did not comment, did not acknowledge it out loud. he simply reached for his cup and took a small sip, letting the moment belong to her. "I should go back," she said after a while, her voice calm, not rushed, not burdened, just stating what would eventually happen, and Marcus nodded once, not urging, not delaying, just accepting the direction of time. "You will," he replied, and there was no finality in it, just a quiet understanding. She looked at him then, really looked, as if trying to memorize something she could not quite name, not his features, not his presence exactly, but the way the night had felt with him there, the absence of pressure, the absence of expectation, and she held that for a second longer than necessary, her gaze soft but focused. "Will I see you again?" she asked, and the question came out before she could measure it, before she could shape it into something more controlled, and for the first time that night, there was a slight pause from Marcus, not uncertainty, but consideration, as if the answer mattered enough to be handled carefully. He leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged but his voice quieter when he spoke. "You might," he said, and he did not elaborate, did not promise, did not create something larger than what existed, he just left the possibility there, open, unforced. Victoria nodded slowly, accepting that in a way she did not expect she would, and she glanced once more toward the window, the sky now lighter, the edges of buildings beginning to take shape against the morning, and she realized the night had given her something she had not been looking for, not an answer, not a solution, but a moment where she did not have to be anything other than present, and as she reached for her coat, moving with a calm she had not carried in years, she did not rush, did not gather herself into the version of who she needed to be next. She simply stood, steady, grounded, and for the first time, the thought of stepping back into her world did not feel like returning to something heavy. It felt like walking back with something she could not yet explain, but knew she would not leave behind. The bell above the diner door gave a soft chime as Victoria stepped outside, the early morning air cooler now, cleaner somehow, and for a second she just stood there on the sidewalk, her coat wrapped loosely around her, her breath steady, her mind not racing ahead the way it usually did when a new day began, and behind her, Marcus followed at the same unhurried pace, stopping just a step short of closing the distance. Not out of hesitation, but out of respect for the space she might need. The street looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more ordinary, the kind of place people passed through without noticing, and yet it felt marked now, like something had happened here that could not be undone, even if no one else would ever know it. Victoria turned slightly, her eyes meeting his again, not searching this time, not questioning, just holding the moment as it was, and for a second neither of them spoke. The silence stretching in a way that did not feel empty, just complete. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice quiet, not formal, not rehearsed, just simple in a way that carried more weight than any polished speech she had ever given, and Marcus nodded once, not brushing it off, not expanding it into something bigger, just accepting it as it was meant. She hesitated then, her hand lifting slightly as if she might say more, but the words did not come, or maybe they were not needed, and instead she let her hand fall back to her side, her posture steady, her shoulders no longer carrying the same invisible weight they had the night before. A car passed slowly at the end of the block, the city beginning to wake in quiet increments, and Victoria glanced toward it before looking back at him, as if reminding herself that time was moving again, that this moment would not stay suspended forever. "You are not going to ask who I am," she said, not as a challenge, but as a realization, and Marcus gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that did not need to be seen to be understood. "I think I already know enough," he replied, and there was no curiosity in his tone, no attempt to uncover more than what had been given, just a calm certainty that did not rely on titles or names. She nodded slowly, accepting that in a way she did not expect she would, and for a brief moment she considered saying something more, offering something more, but the thought passed, not out of reluctance, but because it no longer felt necessary. She stepped back then, creating a small distance between them, not as separation, but as transition, and when she turned to leave, her steps were measured, not rushed, not pulled forward by obligation, just moving with intention. Marcus watched her go without following, without calling out, his hands resting loosely at his sides. his presence unchanged even as the moment